All right, so organizing life. Why do we do it? Your bell work should have covered that. At least why you think we do it, okay? So let's look at the actual reasons why and what it all means. Now you've had some practice with this. You should be familiar with the vocabulary because of the chapter survey we did last week, about a week ago. And then we did that online assignment. Well, it was on Google Classroom, but the one we did started on Monday, that one, and was due Tuesday. So with all those questions, you're going to see a lot of that on here. All right. So why? Why do we classify? So this is if you kind of had a loosey-goosey answer for your bell work, try to fill in the blanks here, but with just the basics of this. This is a lot of information, but it's all in your notes there on page 1 under slide 2 and 3, okay? So when organisms are classified, they're organized and grouped according to similarities. So you look at these trees, for example, you're going to see that, hey, these seem to be similar, but also they're mildly similar to that one, but they're not similar to that one. So that's like the first step. And then it's called taxonomy, the whole thing, the branch of biology. So there are biologists out there who are what are called taxonomists. And it is pretty much, they live their life taking organisms, new ones particularly, because that's the most fun thing, and finding exactly where they go in the whole great big picture of all that we know about biology, and actually coming up with a proper name for that organism. You may not think that that's a big deal. Of course, they do a lot more than that, but taxonomists. Okay, so there are currently between 1.5 and 1.8 million named species in the world, and about half of those are insects. They're everywhere, bugs, right? No one knows how many species are still to be discovered. Estimates for the total number of species on the planet range from 3 to 100 million. You have to think about this. It shows how little we currently know about our diversity, but all of the like uncharted areas of the Amazon and the deserts and at the bottom of the ocean. So at the tops of tall trees, we just haven't discovered in the soil everything yet. No one knows. The taxonomy also helps biologists establish those evolutionary relationships that we have talked about in the past couple of units. Evolution, obviously, genetics. So helps paint the big picture, right? And finally, by knowing what species are related, we can understand more about where we came from, scientifically speaking, develop better medical procedures, find better medicines, prevent extinctions. So medicines from plants that if we just go in there and blindly destroy the forest without understanding or before understanding what those plants can give us, we may be destroying the cure for cancer, for example, or the common cold, viruses. We don't know how to cure viruses yet. Preventing extinctions and avoiding ecological disasters. Now there's a question in your notes, see right here, whenever you see this, I've been doing this all year, so this question thing, it's this one actually. Why do we need to protect honeybees? All right, the answer is right there on the screen. See? If we did not protect honeybees, if we keep spraying poisons randomly and without thought to ourselves and what we need to survive, if it wasn't for them, 90% of the world's nutrition supply, all those fruits and vegetables that are pollinated, would be gone and people would start to starve. So we have to think about those things. And Well, the first thing is knowing how species are related. Because if we can determine the difference between how a poison, a pesticide, kills a bad bug, maybe like this guy, okay, compared to a bee, then maybe we can take care of our environment better. So what characteristics are used by taxonomists when they classify organisms? And there's 4 of them we're going to discuss today. The first one is a structural, which is morphology. The morphology is like the shape, not the function, but the shape, okay? So the structures. So we've got difference between cell type, the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. There's a question in your notes about that, and we'll talk about these later, but the main difference is that prokaryotes, like bacteria, don't have a nucleus. We discussed that a long time ago when we learned about cells, and eukaryotes do have a nucleus. The prokaryotes, bacteria's DNA, remember, is all inside, not in a membrane, like a nuclear membrane. And then, of course, analogous structures, like the leg of an ant and the leg of a horse, or the fin of a dolphin versus a fish, or the wing of an insect versus a bird, okay? Those are analogous structures. One example, structural. So when you look at these things, you say, is it related or not? Is it similar or not? And then these 3. So functional, so is it an autotroph or a heterotroph? If it's an autotroph, meaning makes its own food, right? Like a plant, we're going to put it in one category, and if it has to eat something to get its food, then we'll put it in a different group. Type of metabolism, is it aerobic? Remember that? Or is it anaerobic? Does it use oxygen or does it not need oxygen? And they would go instantly in separate piles. Embryological, are they related? So when they are embryos, and you can see all of these are very similar, but as you go to the mid-stage embryo, you're going to start to see some changes. So then these would be in a different pile over here, and then these would be in another pile, but they're all vertebrates. So initially they start in the vertebrate pile, and then they spread out into different piles. And that's what taxonomists do. They look at all these things. And then finally, the most recent one, and really the most important one, is the DNA one. Because we talked about hyenas, remember? And how hyenas were classified as using other 1 through 3 as dogs. But once you get to the biochemical, we realized that no, they're not dogs, they're more mongoose creature. All right, now where did this come from? You have to think about what is known. And years ago, and I don't mean just a few years ago, but yeah, with DNA, but even before that, like, hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, we didn't know a lot about this at all. Humans didn't know a lot about this at all. So the more we learn, the more sophisticated our system is. I mean, we used to think that there were 4 elements. 4 elements. Water, earth, fire, and air. That's it. And if something, everything fit into one of those places. And that was this simplistic way to classify everything on the planet. Well, obviously we know when new facts arrive, theories change, and so does taxonomy, okay? When new evidence arises, we change how things are done. So the history continued. Aristotle, more than 2,000 years ago, he developed the first widely accepted system. And he pretty much classified organisms as animals. You're in the animal group or you're in the plant group. And that was kind of it. And then based upon that land, water, and air, you are an animal of the land, you're an animal of the air, you're an animal of the water. Okay? Plant, small, medium, large, done. Have a nice day. Go to your picnic, Aristotle. You're finished. It's not that easy. Not that simple, right? So check out what this is his classification system. So, he had herbs, shrubs, and trees. So the small, medium, and large. And then he had the land, water, and air. And of course, he separated animals that have red blood or no red blood. Very simplistic system. All right, we're on slide 9 now. Yeah, okay. So Linnaeus comes around many years later, and he has a system based called taxonomy, system of taxonomy. Was the first formal ones, based on more formal rules than Aristotle's, okay? So he broke up, for example, all of these would be considered one thing in Aristotle's thing, right? But he broke them up into birds. For example, this is one example, birds of prey, perching birds, wading birds, and this system is still used as the jumping point for anyone who wants to classify a new organism. So let's say we found a new species of owl. Instantly, we would say, oh, it's not a perching bird, it's not a wading bird, it's a bird of prey. Let's start there, and then we'll see where it fits in. And if it doesn't fit in anywhere that exists already, it'll be its own group of owls. And so Linnaeus made this method, which you should already be familiar with at this point because of the activities or assignments that you've had over the past week, something called binomial nomenclature. And essentially that means naming with two names. It's a system of naming with two names. Naming with two names. And so you get a species name that has two parts. The first part is the genus and the second part is the species. Here's an example. This is a pebble crab, but there are all different kinds of pebble crabs. So which one is this? This is Xanthias lamarckii. And we'll talk more about what that means exactly in a moment. So and just like us, we're Homo sapiens. And a horseshoe crab is Limulus polyphemus. So, because there's different kinds of those organisms. So here are some rules for writing them. Again, you went over this in that POGIL work we did on Monday and Tuesday, which should have been turned in online. There are rules, and I see people breaking these rules all the time. And I don't mean students, which is bad enough, particularly since I just taught you how to do this, and I see mistakes happening, but in the media, in newspapers, magazines, articles online, on the news, when they put a species, which is very rare, they will mess it up all the time. And they learn this just like you did in high school, but I guess they forgot. So the rules are the genus is always capitalized, and the species is not. Species is lowercase. For example, Ursus americanus. That is your American black bear, right here. The scientific name, if it's printed in a book or if it's printed anywhere, like if you're typing your notes, for example, right now, and you it was on a computer document, it's always italicized. Always italicized, where the letters, sideways. But if it's written by hand, Ursus americanus, you underline both parts. And you see the capital, genus, lowercase, species. And then, after the scientific name has been written completely once, like if you're writing a paragraph or an article or a story about this animal, and it's already been mentioned once, then for the remainder of the work that you're writing, you would do this. You would abbreviate the genus by writing just the capital and then continue to write the species out like that. That's the rules for classification. Now, why do we use them at all? Well, the biggest reason is less confusion. We want to have less confusion. And these two examples right here. There's lots of examples. Each scientific name is unique. And they're used by scientists from all over the world. So let's say you have the dandelion and you're trying to refer to it in a scientific paper or with other scientists and you're around the world, and You mean the dandelion? No, I mean the Lowentzahn. No, the pissenlit. No, the diente de leon. So, what are you talking about? Well, they're all going to say Taraxacum officinale, okay? And that is going to be, they all understand that. It's Latin, it's a language that nobody uses anymore, except scientists mainly. It's a very handy tool. Think about it being compared to other kinds of tools. If you're building a car and all of your instruments, or tool sizes are all different, that's why we have millimeter sockets and standard sockets, so wrenches. That's a problem. If they were all the same, there would be less problems. So that's why, okay? And it has meaning. They tell you something about the organism. So what does Taraxacum officinale, Taraxacum officinale, some of them are not easy to read. It's Arabic, it comes from Arabic, meaning bitter herb. That's where that word comes from, okay? The common names can be misleading. So you've got a fish and let's say you're not even a scientist. Let's just say you work in the aquarium industry and you sell fish for fish tanks. And you're like, oh yeah, you want a chocolate tang? And then you get something that does not look like a chocolate tang. And you're like, oh, I didn't want that. I wanted the mimic tang, or I wanted the mimic surgeonfish, or the chocolate surgeonfish. Well, what are you talking about? All these common names are confusing. Let's just call it Acanthurus pyropheris, which means thorn tail. Looks like thorns from the Greek. And now we know what we're talking about, okay? And here are some more examples. The common name versus the Latin name. And there's a question in your notes about this. Two of them in your notes are wrong, and you have to correct them in your notes, okay? So you can do that at a later time. All right, now what are the taxonomic categories? So we're in the middle of page 3, and they're used by scientists as part of what's called a nested hierarchical system. Nested meaning that each category is contained within the other. So all of these species are contained in this genus, and all of these genuses are in this family, and then there's multiple families in this order, and multiple orders in that class, and so on and so forth, multiple phylums in that kingdom, and then a domain. So it goes from the broadest domain to the more specific. And so in all of this, Eukarya, Animalia, Chordata, Mammalia, Carnivora, Ursidae, genus Ursus. In genus Ursus, there are 2 species. We already saw a picture of the black bear. Now, this is Ursus thibetanus, which is the Asiatic black bear. And if you see the difference, particularly they have some white fur right there along their chest. That's one difference, but they're very closely related. But they're different species in the same genus and in the same everything else thereafter. And so here are the categories, again, which you should know these sort of by now, but there's an order. Yes, that's my cat. Her name is Ziti. So each level is called a taxon. So taxon, just taxonomic levels, short taxon, okay? And so you've got kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You should be able to do that by yourself eventually. Kingdom, phylum, order, class, family, genus, species, okay? And all of the organisms around the world and the whole planet can be put into these different, and there's a domain on top as well. This one's missing domain, but Animalia, it's an animal. Chordate, it has a backbone, okay? Mammalia, it's a mammal. Carnivora, it's a carnivore. Felidae, it's a cat. Felis, and then it's not a Felidae, you'll see, there's other ones, okay. And then Catus, or Domesticus also works for that. So the domain, again, is the most inclusive, We're going to talk about each of, we're only going to talk about domain and kingdom. We don't go into phylum, class, order, family. That would take, if you were to take a zoology class, which I would love to teach, that's just about animals. We would go into all of the phylum and the classes and the orders for all the different species. Not all of them, not millions, right? But a lot of standard ones that you're familiar with. So again, most inclusive to least inclusive down in the bottom. And when we get to species, is only one. So it can go from millions to one. And then kingdom, there are 6 kingdoms. We're going to talk about each one of them. Archaea, eubacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. A phylum is a bunch of classes. Phylum is a bunch of classes. A class is a bunch of orders. An order is a bunch of families. And a genus is a bunch of species. Okay? And plural, genera. So if you're talking about multiple species, you say genera. And that's, again, the most exclusive. It excludes all the others. Domain includes all the others. Exclusive, inclusive. And then there's a way to remember, there's a mnemonic to remember this. Kids prefer candy over fried green spinach. And if kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is not good enough for you, then you can remember the fried green spinach and hopefully remember the order, because that's definitely going to be a question on your test in this class and possibly the EOC, okay? All right, what is a species? It's not so easy to define a species. In general, it's a kind of organism. And there's 3 ways to define it, and we're going to focus on 2 of them mainly. So typological, biological, and phylogenetic. So, I mean, look at this. So here, you've got 2 different species, and they kind of look the same. This one's a little bit bigger, maybe has a thicker collar of dark feathers, but these are the same species, and they look different, very different. It isn't like this bird's blue and they're this different species. These are the, you just pretty much look like Kevin Hart, okay? It's confusing. How do you solve this problem? All right. So what's a species? This is the first one. This is the old Aristotle, Linnaeus, logic here, okay? So physical similarities only. That's why the hyena, going back to that example, was placed in the wrong place, wrong taxon. So based on the idea that species are unchanging, distinct, and natural types, it has very limited usefulness because there's much variation within a species and they change over time, right? So, there's a question right above that. Why do we know today that species are not unchanging? I'm looking for a word there. It starts with an E. So they would put these 2, a duck and a chicken, into the same category, and we know that they are not. They're very different. So here's this biological species concept. This is, it defines a group of organisms able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring in a natural setting. This is what I've taught you a species was. In the evolution unit, we learned what a species was. The 2 organisms have to be able to naturally, if you put them in an environment, not a cage, but I mean in the wild, naturally mate and produce an offspring that can also have babies. It's fertile or viable, okay? And this applies in most cases, and so there it's most frequently used definition of what a species is. A non-example is what you see on the screen here. We've got the horse and the donkey. They could be in the same pasture their entire lives and they would never mate. And so therefore, it's not a natural setting. And then when they are put together, when the sperm and the egg are put together by humans, you get a mule, which doesn't have its own species. This is its species name. It's a cross between the two. And it's not fertile. Mules can't have babies. And this is the last one, phylogenetic species concept. And we've worked a little bit with these phylogeny trees, but we're going to work a little bit more in genetics. We worked a little bit with these, or evolution, both actually. Genetics, we worked with pedigree charts, which look similar to this. We're going to see the difference between these two in the next part of this notes, which is not right now. Okay, so a phylogenetic species concept defines a species as a cluster of organisms distinct from other clusters and shows a pattern of ancestry and descent. Can be used for extinct species, and it also takes molecular data into account. So this is a more advanced definition of what a species is. And here's a phylogenetic tree with the ancestors and the present day species. And you can see A and B have the most recent common ancestor. And then this is the most recent common ancestor for all of these. So it's relatively easy to use as a tool. All right, so let's practice using one really quick. We're going to have a lot more practice in the future, but you have some questions in your notes at the bottom of page 4. So what is the closest living relative of the horsefly? So here's the horsefly. D, closest living relative obviously is the flea. Yes, okay, species C. What is the most common recent ancestor of species A, C, and E? A, C, and E. And you have to trace them all back. So A and C would be Y, but E, X. Okay? Species X, we don't know what that is. It doesn't probably exist anymore. And then finally, our katydids, right here, are they more closely related to horseflies or dragonflies? And of course, they're more related to horseflies because they share the most recent common ancestor of Y. So write those answers. And if you need more time, you're going to have to come back to this, okay? Because we are now flipping to page 5. Moving on. Okay. So this is in your notes. This is just really quick. Our classification tells us how closely related organisms are. And there are 2 questions, and you have to explain why. So this is kind of a thought question. You're going to come back to these later. I'm not going to linger here for too long. Okay, so just know that you have to go back and answer those later. A lot of you are continuing to lose points on your notes because you're leaving these questions that you have to go back to and answer for a different time, and then you're forgetting to do them or refusing to do them, one or the other. I don't know which one it is. But, all right, kingdoms and domains. We are on slide 24 in the middle of page 5. So the broadest category in the classification used by most biologists is the domain. Now at present, the most widely used biological classification system has 3 domains and 6 kingdoms. The 3 domains are bacteria, archaea, and eukaryota. And here are examples of them. So bacteria and archaea are similar, one-cell organisms that are don't have nuclei in their cells, right? Prokaryotic cells have no nucleus. And then, of course, the eukaryotes. All of these have nuclei in their cells, and those are the protists, the plants, the funguses, and the animals. So the 6 kingdoms are, so we went from domains to kingdoms. And so there's spaces to write them all down. The archaebacteria the eubacteria, protists, and you can see pictures here of them all, artists' renditions of them, fungi, plantae, and animalia. Now I'm using animal and animalia, plant and plantae, fungus and fungi, protista and protist. I'm using those words, because on future tests, you're going to see, you can see either one. And I don't want you to be confused, okay? All right, slide 26. So prokaryotes are organisms that have prokaryotic cells, and all of them are bacteria. So here's the prokaryotes versus the eukaryotes. And eukaryotes are organisms with eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotes can be any one of these: fungus, protist, plant, or animal. This is very basic stuff, guys. All right, so let's answer some questions here. Let's fill in this chart. So which one is the smaller cell and which one is the larger organism? Prokaryotic is going to be smaller, and eukaryotic is going to be larger. Always. As a matter of fact, if this were the size of a eukaryotic cell, a prokaryotic cell might be as big as that O in prokaryotic, or even that I in the I, the point, the dot in the top of the I, much smaller. How about the organelles? What's the difference? The difference is, in prokaryotes, they don't have a membrane around them like our organelles do, but eukaryotics do. So we're talking about the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, the nucleus, other vacuoles, things like that. All things that have a membrane, bacteria don't have. Nucleus, again, no membrane-bound nucleus in prokaryotes. The DNA is just inside the bacterial coating, wall. And then eukaryotes do have a membrane-bound nucleus. And then the chromosomes, and this is something unique as well. Prokaryotic chromosomes are circular. Their DNA is in circular patterns, whereas eukaryotic are linear DNA, in a line. Linear means in a line. Circular means in a circle. All right, we're on the last page of our notes for this part of this unit. We have other notes, but we're going to do those next week. And then we have a test on this unit at the end of next week, right before spring break, okay? So we're going to talk about the different domains and three of the, and all 5 of 6 of the, kingdoms. So, okay. So the different domains are bacteria and archaea, okay? And so what makes these guys different? So this is domain bacteria, kingdom eubacteria, so the very top of page 6. What makes these different is they have in their cell walls, you know how plants have cellulose in their cell walls? That's what makes like wood hard. That's what's if you're writing on paper, which you are, that's what's in your paper, cellulose, because paper comes from trees, right? Anyway, in these guys, they have a polymer called peptidoglycan, and it's a mixture or a combination of amino acids and sugar chains. So there are no amino acids in plant cell walls, but in these guys' cell walls, they have amino acids, and that's what makes them different, mainly. Very diverse, they can survive in many different environments. Disease bacteria are in this domain. Disease bacteria like E. coli, which is Escherichia coli, Streptococcus, and algae, green algae, like a blue-green bacteria. The next domain is archaea and kingdom Archaebacteria. They are thought to be more ancient than bacteria and yet more closely related to our eukaryote ancestors, which is pretty interesting. Archaea are diverse in shape and nutrition requirements, and they're called extremophiles. Extremophiles because they can live in, well, extreme environments, like more acidic, higher temperatures, and higher pressures, depth of the ocean, things like that, even extreme cold. So you're going to find these growing in Yellowstone National Park, where they have the boiling cauldrons of water naturally, geothermal energy, geysers and things like that. Domain to eukarya. So here we are. We would be in this area right here with the wolf. All right, animals and plants are all classified here, and then contains the kingdom Animalia, kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, and kingdom Protista. At this point, you should have that pretty well known. Kingdom Protista, all of them are eukaryotic, and they can be animal-like, like this paramecium that hunts for its own food. They can be plant-like this Euglena. Euglena has a flagella that it whips like a tail to move. The paramecium have cilia that they wiggle like a whole bunch of oars, and it propels them rather rapidly through the water. You can have a fungus-like protist, or you can have even colonial types of protists, like these volvox. So they can be either heterotrophic, like the paramecium, or autotrophic, like the volvox and the Euglena. Autotrophic, remember, makes their own food. Heterotrophic has to eat other things. And they can either be sexually reproducing or asexual reproducing, meaning they just split in two. Here are some animal-like protists. They are called the protozoa, animal-like protists, and there are a whole bunch there. You may have heard of amoebas. They're like slimy things, like the blob that go around and they engulf other organisms inside their cytoplasm, and then they digest it inside their bodies. So these are all protozoans. Zoa meaning animal. Fungi, they are eukaryotic, we know this. They have cells containing membrane-bound organelles, that's what eukaryote means, and they're clearly defined nuclei. Again, that defines eukaryotic. And they obtain their nutrients from organic materials in the environment. And they have cell walls, unlike animals that don't have cell walls. They're more like plants in that way. And in their cell walls, which again is different from plants, okay? So they're kind of like half plant, half animal. They're really odd organisms. They have chitin in their cell walls. It's polysaccharide, meaning many sugars, right? Chitin is found in like crab shells and lobster shells and insect wings. What weird, why would that be in this? So don't eat funguses, especially ones that look like that. That may be actually called the death cap mushroom. And they have spores, that's how they reproduce. And they don't have roots, they have these hyphae that go down inside the ground. Most of the fungus is underground. This is just the reproductive part coming out when you see a mushroom like that. Kingdom Plantae, or the plants, obviously eukaryotic, and they are autotrophic, meaning they make their own food. Plants form the base of all terrestrial food webs. Terrestrial means on the ground, not in the water, okay? And they have cell walls made of cellulose. Again, that is what you're writing on right now. And different types of plants are mosses. Those are non-vascular plants. They don't have xylem and phloem. We learned about that. Seedless vascular plants. Those are ferns. They don't have seeds. They use spores. Gymnosperms, which are pine trees, essentially. Conifers. And then flowering. Okay, get off. Get off. Oh, stupid. Okay. Go back. I was saying flowering trees, flowering plants, any plant that has a flower and produces seeds is an angiosperm. Okay? And those are the different types of plants. And then finally we have kingdom Animalia, which we're most familiar with because we are in this kingdom. They are eukaryotic. They are heterotrophic, meaning they have to eat other things to survive, like this lemur is eating, I don't know, what is that, a sweet potato? I don't know. And they live in water, or land, or in the air. Aristotle would be very happy with that. Symmetry, and they have body symmetry. Symmetry means balanced or similar in body structure. And their plane of symmetry forms mirror images. So no matter how you cut a sea anemone, it's going to have the same plane of symmetry, a mirror image of each other. Same here with lobster. They have, this is called radial symmetry, and this is called bilateral. So you've got, same with us. You can cut us right down the middle and we have bilateral symmetry. Each side will look virtually the same. There's a couple things internally that would be different, like, our liver's over here, and our stomach's over here, and our heart's more on this side as well. So, little things like that, but on the outside, for the most part, we have bilateral symmetry. And that is our notes for the first part of organizing life and classification.